we're not seeing that like, oh, this person in this portrait has a dog who is loyal. No, we see the dog in the painting to suggest that the person who is in this painting is a loyal person. Even before Jung, artists were using elements outside the individual person to represent parts of that person. This is not an official guide to like the rules of Jungian therapy, like not even close. It's just the way I learned to apply some of the concepts of what he wrote about. It started as dream analysis in therapy, where I began to recognize that everything in my dream is me, is made of me. So the buildings, the people, the animals, everything. And then, of course, I did what artists back in the early 20th century, late 19th century did, which was to apply it to art. The reason this works at all is because of the stuff that Jung called the collective unconscious. Basically, all humans share certain experiences, so they share common ideas and images about safety, danger, authority figures, leaders, and all around the world these kind of images are found in art from every kind of culture. Heroes, villains, creators, destroyers, and so on. The idea is that you can apply this dream theory to art because artists put images in their work whether they're aware of it or not. And we can recognize them and be moved by them, whether we're aware of them or not. Because collective unconscious, it happens below the level of conscious awareness, but it still happens. So we're going to apply this to the Pixar movie Up. We'll assume this isn't just a story with discrete characters. We're not analyzing social interactions. Instead, everything is an internal personal experience, and everything in the movie is a part of one individual. If the idea of an individual having parts makes you go, huh? I made a video about that, which I will link in the description. The individual in this case is named Carl Fredericksen. He's the protagonist. He's the conscious awareness of an individual. Everything and everyone else in the movie is a part of him, the self, the conscious. And the story begins in Carl's childhood because, of course it does. And in his child, he discovers a part of himself that gives him hope and joy, makes him feel accepted, loved, like he belongs. And her name is Ellie. The creators use a feminine character for this part, and if I were just analyzing the surface of this story, I'd say it was an example of heteronormativity, that their relationship is one of, male and female. I might even say it's misogynist, that the only important woman in the story is someone whose purpose is solely to serve Carl as consolation, an object of desire, and teacher. But I'm not analyzing the surface of the story. I'm looking deeper at how each symbol relates not to society here and now, but to the collective unconscious's vocabulary of symbols that are universally recognizable to all humans. I think Ellie's femininity is just part of her otherness. She's different from Carl, capable of different things than he is. He recognizes that her difference is a part of himself, the yin to his yang, and they are opposites who exist in a state of interplay. It's the nature of the universe in Tai Chi. She represents change and growth and learning and discovery and freedom and openness, and he loses her. At a universal level, we're seeing darkness lose light. Once light is gone, what's the point of darkness? What even is darkness without light? What would be earth if there were no sky? What would be down if there is no up? See what I did there? It's the title of the movie. It's really important to note that this is the only scene in the movie that's set with music that's not composed specifically for the movie. And it is the famous aria from Carmen. Hold on, let me get this right because my Spanish is not as good as my Russian. Habanera. Habanera. How'd I do, Miguel? Did I get it? Was it close? I'm sorry about my E. One of the famous features of that particular aria is the descending chromatic line. Descending. Like Carl descends in the mobility chair. Like Carl descended from elevation of being with a partner named Elevation. But do you know what that song is about? L'amour est un oiseau rebelle. It says love is a rebellious bird beyond our control. It's wild and it's dangerous. Poor Carl has been hurt so badly, apparently, by love. Also, it says, once you think you've caught it, it escapes. When you think you've escaped it, you're caught. And that's going to matter later. Loss and grief here are not just personal experiences. And I suspect this is why everyone cries at this movie, not just old men whose wives have died. Loss is not just a common experience to humanity. Loss creates imbalance at every level, inside your cells, among your organs, between individuals, within communities, across cultures, within our galaxy, and the vast infinity of the universe. Loss is common throughout all of reality as we know it. So Carl experiences loss, which creates imbalance. He becomes stuck in his house, all in and no out. All stagnation and sameness, with no change or progress or growth, as represented by the buildings all around him. Little characters come to him, offering him options to move forward, but he rejects them because he recognizes that what they offer is not what Ellie offered. It's not learning and growth and progress, it's just another place to stagnate. So he's going to take his house and all its contents, his current self, and its comfortable stagnation, and he's going to move it somewhere else, as if this is growth and progress. He's going to carry everything he has and move it somewhere else. His job had been about selling balloons. He shared color and joy and upness with people, though he no longer does. But he uses that old skill and applies it spectacularly, if misguidedly, to lift his whole house and fly away. Accidentally, he brings along an element he didn't plan to. And of course, it's something other than him. A child, non-white, who is innocent and striving to learn and grow. But the child isn't like Ellie, a fully independent and equal entity capable of teaching him and eager to do it. No, Russell is like Carl before he found Ellie. He feels hurt. He feels abandoned. Remembering that Russell, this child, is part of Carl's self, maybe we can interpret him as the part who didn't get on with making breakfast and paying the bills. He's the part who wanted the Ellie part, the part who wanted growth and openness. Carl treats Russell like an unnecessary appendage, a burden. He doesn't want to see the pain. He doesn't want to take on the task of healing the wound, which is why he got stuck in his house, you see? The wounded part of the self needs the conscious ego to be capable of turning toward difficult feelings with kindness and compassion. He can't turn toward them. It's easier for him to move toward the old goal than it is to turn toward the inward wound. So along the journey, Russell discovers Doug, the dog, who is loyal and brave and trusting. And we all know that dogs have been used in portraits of people to indicate loyalty. So we're not seeing that like, oh, this person in this portrait has a dog who is loyal. No, we see the dog in the painting to suggest that the person who is in this painting is a loyal person. Even before Jung, artists were using elements outside the individual person to represent parts of that person. This is how universal it is. It existed before Jung named it. Russell also discovers Kevin, the literal bluebird of happiness. She's the only other feminine character in the story who really matters. She's a mother whose main concern is for caring for her helpless young, but they're lost. Again, not for nothing, Ellie's big moment of suffering was when a doctor tells her she's not going to be able to have children. Carl doesn't give a hoot about Kevin or her babies or her overwhelming compassion, remembering that she's the part of himself that he is denying, and that he and the other helpless and vulnerable parts of himself are the lost baby birds that she longs to care for. Kevin, the bluebird of happiness, is Carl's compassion. And rejecting her is why he can't give Russell compassion. He also can't give Russell trust or loyalty because he's denying his Doug the dog part. But as the journey continues, his house, his old conception of self, is breaking down. The balloons, his former expressions of joy, of upness, are collapsing. Then he finds Charles Muntz, who represents a part of himself he has always wanted. Someone with a life dedicated solely to exploration. His house, his representation of self, is called the Spirit of Adventure. Do I even have to explain that? This is a part he thought he wanted. A part that appears to have everything he ever wished for, but it turns out this part is seeking the bluebird of happiness, the symbol of compassion and caring and connection, so that he can exploit it, which will destroy it. But he can't find it. He's trying to catch the oiseau rebelle, but it evades him. The wild bird of love evades him. Charles Muntz tells Carl, wow, those two names sound a lot alike. Like they're versions of the same name. Like maybe they're representing two possibilities of the same person, but maybe that's just a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence. Anyway, Charles discovered that Carl could lead him to the bird, so starts to see Carl as a rival and attacks. And guess who saves Carl? Kevin. Carl thought he was evading the oiseau rebelle, the rebellious wild bird, but il est là. There it is. Kevin is hurt in the process, but she is the reason they escape Charles, the false goal identity. So Carl's like, okay, let's help Kevin get her back to her life. Oh, right. Like, compassion is a good thing that should be allowed. But here comes Charles, the source of disillusionment, to capture Kevin and sets fire to Carl's old house. Carl has to choose the past or the future, clinging to his old concept of self or truly embracing what's possible, stagnation or growth. He chooses his old house. And now Carl is the source of disillusionment for Russell. Carl has valued what he believes about himself over active, generous love. He justifies it as love for Ellie, this part of him that's gone. That love drives him, and then he reflects on a book she left behind, a piece of her that's left behind. His teacher, the thing he lost from his childhood, has one last lesson to teach him now that he's willing to turn a new page. And that's that he can keep moving forward in her absence. He can fully integrate her lessons and start living them himself, growing into the teacher role. And this is finally when Carl sees that his journey has been toward a goal that isn't really what he wants. And he sees what he wanted was with him all along. Russell, the hurt child. Doug, the trusting and loyal dog. Kevin, the compassionate, caring, connected bluebird of happiness. So he goes and he rescues them. Finally, the self-aware consciousness chooses to turn toward those parts of the unconscious self with kindness and compassion to preserve and protect and heal them. And it isn't easy to do. There's risk and challenge, and mostly he has to let go of all the crap in his house that he thought he had to carry with him all this way. All the parts of himself that represent the past, his stagnation, his stuckness. He perseveres because of the child, the dog, and the bird. He cares about them. He values them. He believes they are worthy, that they are more worthy than his old inanimate parts. The false goal Charles is defeated when his foot gets tangled in balloon strings. The symbol of the past that Carl was trying to preserve becomes the demise of the symbol that he thought he was striving for. But Carl is not destroyed the same way because he lets go of his whole house as an act of care for the parts that he had earlier rejected. So he steals Charles' dirigible blimp thing, the Spirit of Adventure. It's a symbol of a self defined by openness and exploration, just like Ellie. And it's much bigger and fancier and cooler than his old house. Because when you let go of past limitations and allow yourself to risk the slings and arrow of change, that's what can happen. In the next shot, Carl is being pecked by the baby birds. The symbols of vulnerability and the need for care are hurting him a little. He's saying, ow, but he's laughing. His vulnerability hurts him a little, but he doesn't push it away. I would love to talk about more works of art and how I interpret them using this approach. Have y'all seen Us? Jordan Peele tore my mind up with that. And yeah, it's like a horror movie and it's scary. And then it's also got this like kind of social message about, you know, those who live beneath us or are perceived as not real people. But then it's also got this, if you look at it with this third level of like interpretation of the self and the rejection of our shadows, literally in the explanation in the beginning, she's like, there was a girl who had a shadow. Yeah, there was. Yeah, there was. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Now that the barn is set up and I can really record in here, I'll be back to like a normal schedule. And until then, remember that the cure for burnout is not self-care. It's all of us caring for each other.